So from your homepage in Inventor, let's head over to the New button, and under the Assembly header, click standard.iam and click Create. Now when you open up the assembly file, you'll notice that the UI looks a lot similar to the UI we used when creating a part file. However, up in the upper left corner, we have a new tab called Assemble. Now to actually combine parts in our assembly file, we need to head over to the Place button, and under the dropdown, make sure you selected the first option, Place. When you click it, it opens up your computer's file structure. And from there, you can go ahead and select the part files that you want to place in your assembly. So after you selected the file you want to place, you'll notice that it pops up under your cursor and it's faded. To place it, you would do a left click, but before we do that, if you right click, you'll notice that you have a couple of options. You can rotate the part around the x-axis by 90 degrees, around the y-axis by 90 degrees, or even by the z-axis by 90 degrees. In addition, you can also place your part to be grounded at the origin. We'll go over soon what it means to ground. But let's go ahead and left-click our part and place it down by our mouse. You'll notice that the part is no longer faded and the file has been added to the model browser. And you'll notice that we still have the option to place another part, so let's go ahead and place another part, and finally press Escape on our keyboard. Now after placing our part, we can still move it around, and in addition, if we right click, we can also rotate it by selecting the free rotate option, which is also up here. Now, in addition, I also mentioned grounding before. If we don't want our part to move around when we drag it, we can right click our part and then select the grounded option, which makes our part immovable. And you'll notice on the model browser, a little pin icon shows up next to the part icon. And when you right click the part, you'll notice that next to the grounded option, there's a little check mark indicating that our part is. When I want to move my object again, I can simply right click the part and unclick the grounded option. Now my part can rotate and move around freely. Now to actually put these two parts together, we use the Constrain feature. When we click on that, a window pops up with options such as Selections and then Solution. So for selections, you'd mainly use selections to click on two surfaces that you'd want to constrain. And under Solution, we have Mate and Flush, and those two options determine how our two selected surfaces will be put together. Let's start with Mate. When I select Mate and I select two surfaces, I'm basically putting the two surfaces in contact with each other. You can think of it like putting glue on two surfaces and sticking them together. So let's select Mate, and let's say I want these two blue surfaces to be in contact with each other and stick together. So I'll make our first selection, then I'll make a second selection. And you'll notice, after the second selection is made, a little popping sound is played, which indicates the constraint has been applied. And you'll notice that now the two blue faces are sticking together. If you click Apply, then the constraint is applied. Now I'm going to go ahead and press Escape to get rid of the window, and you'll see that when I head over to our two parts, they're sticking together, and when I try to move one, you'll notice how the movement of the other part involved in the constraint, the movement of the other part is also constrained. Specifically, you'll notice that these two surfaces, the two blue surfaces that I made together, never really leave contact, so to speak. Even when I move the other block so that they're no longer touching, you'll notice that the blue surfaces still line up. Now let's go ahead and go over Flush. If I click the Constrain window again, and this time I select the flush option, I can still select two surfaces, except when the constraint is applied, the two surfaces will line up, but they will not stick together. You can think of it like putting tape on the two surfaces I selected so that they line up flat. So if I select this purple surface and this purple surface, once the flush is applied, you'll notice how the rotation angle is removed, and these two surfaces now lie flat together. Now after that constraint is applied, and I try to move my block, notice how the blue surfaces, due to the mate, still remain aligned in contact, and now because of the flush, the two purple surfaces remain lined up. That is to say, that they are flush with each other. They are lined up so that their two surfaces form a flat surface. Now let's say that I want to put these two blocks together so that everything lines up and they form a one continuous big block. We'll go ahead and do another flush because you'll notice that these two surfaces are not lined up yet, so they can still slide around. So I'll head over to make another constraint, and I'll select flush, and for my two selections, I'll select this surface and this surface. And when that constraint is applied, you'll notice that our block is now one continuous solid because the blue surfaces are mated so that these two blocks do not come apart, and this surface, these pair of surfaces, and this pair of surfaces are flushed so that they're always aligned so that none of the blocks can slide apart. Now let's go ahead and add some more blocks. If I click on a block and I use Ctrl-C or right-click and use copy, then I press Ctrl-V or right-click and click paste, I can create some duplicates of our blocks. Now, let's say that I want to constrain these two purple top surfaces with a flush, but I want there to be a little bit of an offset so that they don't quite line up. If I head over to Constrain, and I select Flush, and I select my two surfaces, you'll notice that they line up perfectly. But let's say that I want to have them line up not perfectly. So I'll add a bit of an offset here, say 1 inch, and I click Apply. You'll notice that when I move this block, they slide along, but there's always a little bit of an offset applied so that these two purple surfaces don't exactly. Let's do a similar offset flush to these two purple surfaces. I'm going to go click Constraint, and another important thing to note is that when you make your selections, the first surface you select is going to be the surface that moves. So if I click Flush, and I make this selection first, you'll notice that this surface is going to be the one that moves to catch up with this surface. So you'll notice that the first block moved, which had the first selection. I'm going to apply another 1 inch offset, and you'll notice that, again, these surfaces do not line up. You can also use offsets with mate. If I click Constrain, and I want to constrain this green surface to that blue surface, but I want there to be a little bit of spacing, I can add a little bit of an offset, and you'll notice that now there's a gap between the two surfaces. Once I click Apply, and I head over to move the blocks around, you'll notice that because of the flush offset constraints, the blocks don't slide across each other, and because of the new mate constraint, the blocks don't come apart, but there's always a 1 inch gap maintained between them. Now let's say that I want to undo, delete, or edit a constraint. Of course, Ctrl-Z would eventually undo a constraint, but first I have to undo all the movement I made. So I keep on pressing Ctrl-Z, and you'll notice eventually the constraint is undone because the blocks go ahead and stick back together, and when I move them around, the mate constraint with the offset that we previously applied no longer exists. In addition, to delete or edit a constraint, if you head over to the model browser and click the plus sign to expand a part, you'll notice that all the constraints that were used on your part are listed below. Let's say that I want to edit the offset, I can just click on the constraint, and I can edit the number right there, say, make the number smaller, Or I can right-click the constraint, edit it, and just edit the constraint that way. In addition, if I don't want a constraint to exist, I can just right-click it and delete it. So now you'll notice that only one flush is applied to these two blocks. So those are the basics of constraints. When you're using Autodesk Inventor in FRC, constraints will be one of the most useful tools you'll use when assembling your robot.